Okay, so as we said, the Rambam has, first of all, two basic principles of divine providence in the Jewish tradition. One is human free will, and the other is God's justice. And then he cites two applications of divine justice, which are very far-reaching and perhaps you wouldn't anticipate. One is that it reaches down to the tiniest details of life, the slightest pain, the slightest pleasure. And the other is that a person is held responsible and rewarded and punished even for things which God didn't command, because his mind tells him that they are right or wrong. If he does something that his mind tells him is right, then he'll be rewarded for it. If he does something that his mind tells him is wrong, he'll be punished for it. And I suggested that you could understand this, perhaps I would even say you should understand it, in the framework of there being a creator, and the creator is responsible for the existence of everything, including morality. Things are right and wrong because he makes them right or wrong. But you can know on your own without being told what those things are. And when your mind tells you that it's right to do X, you interpret it as, and of course this is what God wants, because that's what makes it right, but I know it for myself. He didn't have to tell me that it's true. I know it for myself. But of course I'm doing it because it's right, because God wants it to be right, and that's why it's right. So all that could be built into the framework of the person's mind. The analogy here, which many philosophers use for morality in general, not religious morality, but morality in general, is arithmetic, mathematics. Right? You know that 7 plus 5 is 12, not because you were taught it in second grade and you got a candy when you said it right. That's how you were taught to say the words. But you know it because you think it in your mind, well, there's 7 and there's 5 and then there's 12. And you can see that, and you can see that very definitely. So much so that no one in the history of the world has doubted it. Now, we would say arithmetic is right because God made the world that way. So, in fact, when you know, on the basis of your own understanding that 7 plus 5 is 12, what in fact you are knowing is something that God made so, but you may not be aware of that. You may not be aware where it came from. So, just like you don't have to rely on the Jewish religion, 7 plus 5 is 12, what Mishnah did you learn that from, Rabbi? What verse in the Holy Book told you that 7 plus 5 is 12? What piece of oral tradition did you learn 7 plus 5 is 12 from? You don't need that. You don't need that. You know for yourself. God created you with the kind of mind that can grasp 7 plus 5 is 12 without relying on something else to be the authority from which it's taken. That's the kind of statement he's making here about these principles of good and evil. And God's justice extends even to those actions and not limited just to the things that God explicitly commanded or forbade. This is something which one could easily have thought was not the case, but in fact is the case, yeah.
Are there things that our intuitions would point to that we should do, and that we actually should do them, that would be in contradiction with that we know of the Torah?
So the answer to that is what we said yesterday, and that is when we're talking about morality, there are two different levels on which you talk about it. One is your moral principles, and the other is what you should do in practice. And the latter is determined by your moral principles and the facts of the matter. So you could have the following type of contradiction. My moral intuition tells me that I should do X, but that's my blind moral intuition. Now, when I add in the fact that the creator of the universe, who has all of our best interests at heart, told me not to do X, then of course I shouldn't do it. Because now I'm making a practical decision and I have to take into account the facts of the matter. Whereas when I made my side of my intuition, I wasn't taking the facts into account. I was just using my intuition. So, for example, if the Chazon Ish gives this example, if you think that vicious competition, vicious, unrestricted capitalist competition has a downside, it should be limited in a certain way. If someone is providing the needs of a community and there's just enough demand in the community for him to make a decent living, and somebody else comes in with a big wallet and undercuts him and is willing to take a loss for 6 months to drive him out of business, and then there's a Jewish law that says you shouldn't do that. There's also a law against gouging, and that can be Brother Rabbi, but you can't do that. So Chazon says, well, what about if the service you're talking about is teaching Torah? What about that? Should there be unrestricted competition in teaching Torah? Teaching Torah is a way of earning a living, and we're trying to protect people's stability and ability to feed their families. Why should that be different? Yeah, but the halacha says it's different. So it means the halacha is telling you the quality of teaching Torah is so important that it overrides the stability of the income of a family. That you wouldn't know that because you don't know what Torah is. You don't know it's coming from the Creator of the universe, and you know that His rules are ones which will maximize the most important success of mankind in the long run. So you don't know that. So your moral principle of preserving economic stability would tell you, don't have open competition for teaching Torah. But the Torah says, not that your intuition is wrong, but your intuition is blind. Your intuition applies when there's no special explanation otherwise. But when there's a special explanation otherwise, then it overrides it. And the extra information tells you there's a special explanation that tells you that there's information that overrides it. So there can be that kind of conflict, but then it's clear which one should win.
Okay. You're saying our intuition isn't wrong, though?
I
think it's blind but not wrong, but wouldn't that be... never mind. I guess it's a semantical thing. Never mind.
Right. Blind means it's not taking into account some features which are there, which are relevant.
If it did take a look at those features, then it would align with the actual, what we should do.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Okay, so now we're on page 14. So now the question is this. Here I go into a kind of diversion to understand this point in a little more detail. What does it mean that the justice applies to actions that have not been commanded or forbidden? What is it in us that makes it available? What faculty exactly is it in us that delivers its being right, its being wrong, so that, morally speaking, you could be held responsible for acting against it? Now, so you see in the light print at the top of the page, this is Friedlander's translation, and it says, although they have the fourth line, although they have not been prohibited by a prophet, if common sense warns against them. Now you could think, common sense? Because common sense says to do it, if I fail to do it, I'll be punished? Or common sense says to do it, and I'll do it, therefore I'll be rewarded? Common sense? Is that really what creates a moral obligation and which convicts me of being vicious or irresponsible by not following common sense? That's not obvious. So here I have to go into justifying, or in this case correcting, the translation. Now, so I'm in the third paragraph on page 14. Friedlander translates the source of our understanding as common sense. Ibn Tibbon, who lived in the time of Maimonides, and who Maimonides praised as a translator, who translated this work into Hebrew, translates seichel. What is seichel? Seichel is something like intellect. I have to do this. Sorry. Where am I up to? About 100. Okay. This happened yesterday also. Okay. I wouldn't translate sechel as common sense. Intellect comes in degrees, and the common understanding of the vast majority of people is usually primitive. Ask yourself this question. Take any field. It could be sailboating or organic cooking or ancient Chinese monetary system. Who knows this? Who knows the subject well? The vast majority of people, or only a tiny minority of people? Tiny minority in every case. Right? So if you're talking about common sense, it means sort of what everybody sort of agrees on. Wow, that seems to be a pretty weak basis to say, and if you violate what common sense tells you, you're going to be held responsible, and if you fulfill it, you're going to be rewarded for common sense. So I think that Friedlander's translation would make the Rambam's remark unconvincing. But Ibn Tibbon translates it as seichel, as intellect. So when I have problems like this, I go to Rabbi Matalon. I don't know if you would know what his background is, but he has a PhD in medieval Hebrew and Muslim philosophy in the original Arabic. So when I have questions of translation, I go to him and ask him to look up the original and to tell me what it means. And he says the word in the original means something which is natural and common to all people. Wow. Now, listen, common to all people would mean not only the 90% of the population has it, but the 10% also has it. What we call common sense is something which often the 10% just reject. That's what the uninformed and unintelligent and uncaring people think, and we don't think like that. We think differently. This is something which is intrinsic to the human mind, so that it's up and down the scale. That's a little different from what we often think of as common sense. And I'm giving background for Ibn Tibbon's translation. In the Rambam's writings, we're dealing with the Rambam, dealing with his uses of the word, and the idea of its being sechel is something which you can find in the Rambam. Now this is a bit of a digression, but I think you get a sense here of how the investigations have to be carried out. In the guide, which is the book we're studying, we're in part 3, chapter 17, but the first chapter of the, in the first chapter of his commentary on Pirkei Avos, the Ethics of the Fathers, the Rambam lists the activities of seichel. What does seichel do? And one of them is to distinguish between good and evil. So seichel, which is intellectual understanding, it can help you do arithmetic, it can help you do chemistry, it can help you do textual interpretation, it can help you with your relationships with other people, it can help you have a physically fit body. Seichel can also distinguish between good and evil. Well, the seichel's business is to distinguish things that are right and things that are wrong, true and false, correct and incorrect, well-founded, poorly founded, is those kinds of judgments that the seichel operates on. That's one source. In the second chapter of the guide, says the Rambam says 4 things about emes and sheker. This is what I mentioned to somebody yesterday in here. Usually taking the truth and falsity, although that definition is greatly deficient. And this is what he says. Now, this is the Garden of Eden. These are the 4 things the Rambam says. Let's look carefully at them and try to cognize them. Before eating from the tree of knowledge, Adam and Chava understood emes and sheker, but not good and evil. The story says, when you eat from the tree, you'll know the difference between good and evil, which means before they ate from the tree, they didn't know the difference between good and evil. But the Rambam says they do something else, called emes and sheker. After eating, they lost their understanding of emes and sheker, and received in their place the understanding of Tov and Ra, which is good and evil. So you have emes and sheker versus good and evil. You can't have both simultaneously. They started out with emes and sheker, which is infinitely superior. They ate from the tree, and the result was they ended up with good and evil instead. Now he says, emes and sheker are how we describe the propositions that the heavens are spherical and the earth is flat. That is to say, the proposition the heavens are spherical is true, and the proposition the earth is flat is false. So emes and sheker, among the other things that they do, they describe things that are true and false. That's not all they do. That's not the main thing they do, but they do that. They describe true and false. And he says, it's due to the understanding of emes and sheker that they had before they ate from the tree, that they were commanded by the Creator. After all, if somebody gives you a command and you have no clue what that means, do X. And you say, have a nice day. Would you like a cup of tea? Because you don't understand what a command is. You don't understand that if he says do X and you don't, he's going to be upset because he commanded and you violated his command. If you don't have the concept of what a command is, then issuing a command is empty. You might just well talk to a stone. If God commanded them, they must have had appreciation of the fact that when a command is issued, that makes a difference in what you do because it changes the consequences of what you do. It says something about the commander, how he feels about what you're doing. If you don't know that, there's no point in talking to you. So they have to have had some appreciation that a command affects the way you make decisions to act. That was what emes and sheker gave them, because without that, the command would have been empty. God would have been talking to a stone. Emes and sheker meant that they could appreciate what a command is, so it made sense to command them. Is that understanding? Don't appreciate it. Okay, now, let's think about what emes and sheker are. Let's try emes and sheker, the way the dictionaries will tell you, are true and false. Okay, so now, here I am, someone says to me, do X. And what's in my mind is true and false. True and false? He said to do X. Well, it's true, he said it. Okay, and what else? Nothing else. There are no facts in question, no beliefs in question, no propositions in question. He said do X. Okay, that's on record. I have his words. I have a recording. Okay, that's fine. And now I'm off to the races. What's it got to do with me? If all I have in my mind is true and false, I can't then be addressed by a command and respond to it as a command. True and false don't do that for me. In particular, true and false don't describe actions at all. You don't say this action is true and this action is false. You say it's good or bad, productive or unproductive, wise or foolish. You don't say it's true or false. So emes and sheker just mean true and false. The Rambam's words aren't applicable. How can knowing emes and sheker enable me to appreciate what's going on when a command is issued? It's just not even apples and oranges, apples and pebbles. They're in two different realms that have nothing to do with one another. Emes and sheker somehow have to determine actions and guide me in making my decision what to do. And the Rambam says that's what they did. Emes and sheker did that. So now, what you have to hear is that sometimes emes and sheker applies somehow to true and false, but emes and sheker does other things as well. It in fact applies to actions, gives me guidance how to respond to commands that I'm given, and that's what we lost. We lost the aspect of emes and sheker that guide action. We preserved the aspect of emes and sheker which is associated with truth and falsity. So the dictionaries isn't, I would say, totally off base. It isn't as if they said that emes and sheker are butterflies and mushrooms. But what they did is they took one aspect and one application of a concept and made that the whole concept. Emes and sheker are related to truth and falsity in an indirect way, but they have other aspects as well, says the Rambam, in particular the aspects of guiding action, and that's what we lost. Hold on one second. And by the way, he says a similar thing in the laws of repentance, which he wrote in Hebrew. He says, when you serve God, you do the emes because it's emes. So he's using the word emes for something you do. In English, you cannot say we do the truth. You don't do truth. You don't do falsity. You do right and wrong. You do good and evil. You do wise and silly. You do well-advised or ill-advised, but you don't do true and false. So the Rambam says you do emes. The emes has got to be the kind of thing that you do. Now, let me just try to put a little bridge. Okay? Think about the earth is round. That's a fact. That's a fact that exists in the world, and it's established. And the poor people of the Flat Earth Society, which really exists, with headquarters in London, about which you can draw your own conclusions, they're just poor, benighted people. They're going against the shape of the world. Okay? Now, what you have to imagine is feeling that way about an action. This action is as established, permanent, objective, absolute as the fact that the shape of the earth is round and not flat. I think it's very difficult to feel that way. Very difficult to think of evaluating an action with that kind of external objectivity, certainty, absoluteness, unchallengeable. We think about making our decisions, and we have reasons for, reasons against. We know other people have different reasons, and other people have different commitments, other people have different priorities. We say, okay, this is how I do it, they can do it that way. Doesn't it all sound like the earth is round and not flat? But Emes and Sheker carry that significance of absolute, objective, external fact. We don't have that for actions. That's what they had. Emes did for actions what Emes does for propositions. Emes for propositions means that's the way the world is, like it or not. Like certain pundits say, the facts don't care about your feelings. The facts are what they are. So that's a measure of what we've lost. They had Emes and Sheker both for propositions, and actually I can make it into one concept. I don't have to have it split like that, but I'm not doing that at the moment. If you press me, I'll do it for you. The absoluteness of propositions, the truth that's external and objective and fixed, and they had a similar way of grasping the nature of actions, and that we have lost. We have something that's much weaker, much more fluid, much more relative, much more open to doubt, much more open to controversy, to development and cultural change, and that's a measure of what we have lost from what they had. Okay? Yeah.
So are we saying that it's the reason for the actions that we supposedly lost, or is it the actions themselves?
No, they have reasons. Yeah. So we're talking now about the nature of seichel. Seichel certainly applies to the earth is round rather than flat. That's what the seichel does. It evaluates evidence and argument and consistency and inconsistency, that sort of thing. And then we're being told the same faculty could be applied to actions as well. And could be applied to good and evil as well. Right? So now that's that's the bridge to saying this isn't just common sense, make sure you take a half hour's walk after supper. It's something much more fundamental than that. Oh, and then I bring the chapter 5. So it seems like intellect is a reasonable way to see what the Rambam is telling us, gives us this deliverance of what's good and evil. And then the person says, look, I'm using my intellect. My intellect guides me because it very regularly orients me to the way the world really is. My intellect tells me that this is good to do and this is bad to do. And just as you would feel a responsibility to live in terms of facts which your intellect delivered, not only would you feel a responsibility, but you would even more so feel that other people are responsible to live in terms of facts which the intellect has delivered. Imagine someone who will be burning his leaves in October in New Hampshire because that's what my grandfather did. And somebody comes and says, you're polluting the air. And he says, I don't believe in that stuff. You guys are all commies. I think, my grandfather did it. He lived to 82, and I'm 96. Leave me alone. What will you do? You'll call the fire department and put out his fire because intellect has revealed to us that he's polluting the atmosphere. He's really hurting people. If he doesn't believe it, too bad. So the intellect delivers conclusions which you feel should be lived up to, and you're prepared to force people to live up to them. The intellect also delivers truth and false, a good and evil, and that's why you're held responsible for it. Because it's that kind of a faculty which you know produces things which you're responsible to live up to. I think that's the background for what the Rambam is saying here. We're together? Question, yeah.
So, as we mentioned, that it's more, it's not as strong as Emerson Shaker, good and evil, that could even sometimes produce the shaker thinking it's good, or like it can really go into those realms, like.
What, so. Oh. Okay. Yeah.
Not that sometimes through good and evil could confuse the greater purpose of Emerson Shaker to some extent, like is it sometimes contradicting
Sure.
the conditions of.
Sure, that's why good and evil are much inferior, not just because they're less certain, but because they're going to be inaccurate. Because the fluidity right away. You know, it'd be like someone saying, Earth is round and the Earth is flat. You know, on Mondays and Thursdays I think it's round, and the other days I think it's flat, and on Shabbos I don't think anything because I'm too tired, you know. It just floats in and out. Floats in and out? I think you'd be worried about a person whose beliefs about facts floated in and out. If you think there was something not functioning right with his mind, you know, he's not dealing with the world in a way that's healthy. So that we've lost that clarity. That doesn't mean it's not intellectual, but we lost that clarity. Right? It's an inferior type of intellectual grasp. But it's an intellectual grasp. Since it's an intellectual grasp, we can understand why we're responsible to follow it, just like we're responsible to follow other things that the intellect delivers. Maybe what you mean to say in part is that we do make mistakes. Sure, we make mistakes, but so what? You know, the fact that you make mistakes in medicine means that you should just go to a voodoo doctor in the South Sea Islands because mistakes are made? I don't think so. By the way, there's a famous statement in the Talmud which people use in this incorrect way. Meishiv chachamim achor. There's a verse that says God will turn the wise back. He'll confound the wisdom of the wise. Okay. Let's say the wise, when left to their own devices, get it right 92% of the time. So he confounds their wisdom. So they're only going to get it right 75% of the time. But if I make my own decisions, I'm going to get it right 13% of the time. It's still better to follow the wise. So to say that people make mistakes is not to say that you shouldn't follow them. The question is, what's their record? And if they make far fewer mistakes than other people, then they're the people you want to trust, even though they'll make mistakes. Same thing's true with your own faculties. I trust my Uncle Robert, you know. I love him and I trust him. And he told me about the stock market, and he told me about Chinese history, and he told me about microbiotic foods, and I just trust my uncle, right? Okay. That's better than, you know, looking at what the Mayo Clinic has to say? Or Harvard Med has to say? Is it better than that, your Uncle Robert? Probably not. So that being the case, you know, something wrong if you're not paying attention. Here, you say, well, I know it's wrong to, you know, he went to the telephone book and he left his wallet on the table. I'm a pretty fast runner. If I pick it up, he's not going to catch me. So I can get away with it. So, you know, I need the money. So why not, you know? And you ask me, but isn't it wrong? Yeah, it's wrong. You're right, it's wrong. It's just that, now, later on, can I claim, why'd you hold me responsible? Why are you punishing me? Because you knew it was wrong. You knew it was wrong. What I know isn't always right, and I still make mistakes? Yeah, it isn't always right. But it's better than flipping a coin or doing what's going to get you a profit at the moment. That's going to be wrong a lot of the time. If you use your intellect, you'll be wrong 10% of the time. Then you have responsibility to use it because it's the best resource that you have. Not that it always gets things right. This is a big, very common fallacy. You prove that someone is fallible, and then you say, therefore I can discard his opinion. It just doesn't follow. It just doesn't follow. Okay, so let's go on. Okay, now on page 15. Okay, all of this I've told you. So in the middle of the page, in the light, in the regular print, thus our sages say, this is Rambam talking, Hashem does not deprive any being of the full reward of a good deed. Everyone gets it. By the way, I hope it's clear and obvious this applies to non-Jews as well as Jews. Nowhere has he mentioned the Jewish people as a special case in this exposition. Again, he who says that Hashem remits part of a punishment, that is to say, well, you did this, and the punishment should be X, Y, Z, I'll leave out X. I'll just give you Y and Z. We punish severely. He's long-suffering. God will delay the punishment, but in the end, if nothing happens to change the conditions, he will be sure to exact punishment. Another saying is this: he who has received the commandment and acts accordingly is not like he who acts in the same manner without being commanded to do so. Meaning that if you're commanded, you get a bigger reward than the one who isn't commanded. But as the Rambam says, it goes on to say, you don't get zero, you get less. The fact that something's commanded is an indication that God, so to speak, has a bigger stake in it. The fact that it isn't commanded means that God has a lesser stake in it. But you do get rewarded for that. Now, this is the thing that I mentioned to you, and here you'll see what the Rambam says. The same principle is expressed in all our sayings of our stages. But they contain an additional doctrine which is not found in the law. Now, he said at the beginning, I'm going to tell you what's in the writings of all the prophets, including Moses, and in the vast majority of our sages. Aha. So then there's a minority that disagree. So that's what he's coming to now. So it's not found in the law. Law with the capital L means the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. It's not found there anywhere. But it is in certain statements of the sages, which is called afflictions of love, as is taught by some of our sages. Now, the words afflictions of love appears in the Talmud, but then there's a question of how it should be interpreted. So he's saying it's in the Talmud, and then there are various interpretations of those words, and it's those interpretations of his words that he's going to take issue with. According to this doctrine, it is possible that a person be afflicted without having previously committed any sin in order that his future reward may be increased. So, Reuven is suffering. Why is he suffering? You look at his history. Seems to be a good history. Seems to be a good record. Hard to find any chinks in the armor. Maybe a few mistakes, few minor mistakes, but he's undergoing quite difficult suffering. Where is that coming from? According to the view that Maimonides is opposing, his record is what it is. Nothing he's done in the past justifies the suffering that he's undergoing. He's going to get a bigger reward in the future. If he didn't have the suffering, he'd get a lesser reward. Because he has the suffering, he'll get a greater reward. Well, Maimonides says that's unjust, and therefore it's a wrong explanation. It's a wrong explanation. Now, you say, how can he go against this statement in the Talmud? So first of all, as I said, it's not a statement in the Talmud, it's a statement in the Talmud which is interpreted in a certain way. So he's not opposing the Talmudic text, he's opposing this interpretation of the Talmudic text. In fact, Rashi interprets it this way. Rambam didn't have Rashi available to him because of the chronology, but in fact, Rashi interprets it this way. But there are others who interpret differently. The Ramban, Nachmanides, who was a great follower of Maimonides, though also a critic, interprets it in a different way. Altogether, in the Shara Gmul, he says, there are various kinds of things that people do wrong, and there are various kinds of reactions to them. There's a certain type of thing that people do wrong, which, because they did it and it's wrong, needs to be attended to in some way or other. In particular, when you do things that are wrong, they leave a residue in you that has to be expunged before you can go into the world to come. And the sufferings of love purify the person from those mistakes. These are mistakes, what's called b'shogeg. B'shogeg means the person did something that's in fact wrong, but didn't know. He didn't know because one of two reasons. Either he didn't know the law, or, although he knew the law, he didn't realize that what he was doing would violate the law. Because sometimes you don't know what you're doing. You know, I just put my book down on the table. Did I know there was an electric eye there that was going to turn on the lights? I didn't know that. I was just putting my books on the table. So he's not vicious. His moral principles and his religious fidelity is certainly intact. But to be a shogeg, he had a responsibility to know. He should have known. He should have investigated. There was enough evidence around laws of Shabbos. Well, I know one thing, there are lots of them. Lots and lots of laws of Shabbos. I know another thing. I know that I don't know them very well. And I know roughly the routine that people go through in their houses on Shabbos, because I've seen it thousands of times. Now something happens in my house that's never happened to me before, I have no knowledge of it. Shouldn't I be worried? This has never happened. I have no information about it. Maybe there's a problem here. Maybe before I react to it in the way that I think I want to, I should check and see what the law is. There's where the failure is. The failure is to investigate the circumstances or investigate the law, and therefore when I do it, I didn't know I was violating Shabbos. I would never violate Shabbos if I knew it was a Shabbos violation. But in this case, where really I should have investigated, I decided, well, not investigate. That's what I'm being held responsible for. Says the Ramban, that kind of failure, the only right place to cleanse a person from that kind of failure is in this world. He doesn't explain why, not what I read, but he says, Gehenna, for example, is the wrong place. You can't do it there, it's not possible. So sufferings of love are sufferings of love in this sense. God wants you in the world to come. And you can't go into the world to come with any residue of evil. The world to come tolerates only good. So God is cleansing you to make you qualify for the world to come. That's how he shows that he loves you. Here, this fits Maimonides' principle. There's justice here because there was a failure here. This is utterly unlike the idea that your record is perfectly good, you never did anything wrong, you're not guilty of anything, but will increase your reward in the world to come. Indeed, as one of the other Rishonim says, what do you mean you're going to increase his reward in the world to come by making him suffer here? Why shouldn't he eat from both tables? Why should he have to pay for more reward in the world to come by suffering here? If he has such a good record, let him enjoy this world and the next world. There's certainly, it seems to be no justice in that. And the Rambam says God's ways are justice. So that's why he cannot abide this interpretation of that Talmudic statement. Yeah, you got a question?
Yeah, so with that accountability for not, let's say, investigating a situation where there seems to be like, because you have a suffix about something, would that apply even if the thing you're doing isn't a violation? As in, I'm doing this action, I don't know if it's a violation or not, but I'm not going to look into it. It happens to be, it's not a violation.
That's a very nice question. It's a very nice question. This borders on the philosophical problem of moral luck. Let me just articulate. One second. Let me just articulate what kind of problem it is. One intuition that we have is that you're only responsible for what you have control over. Another intuition we have is that your responsibility is affected by the outcome of what you do. So let's take two people, each of whom shoots a bullet at a person. The first guy shoots a bullet, the bullet flies true and kills him. He's a murderer. Second guy shoots a bullet and the wind blows it aside and it misses the guy. Attempted murder. How do we feel about the two guys? Well, on the one hand, one guy committed murder and the other guy didn't. On the other hand, in terms of intention, viciousness, corruption of character, and all the rest, they're identical. They both wanted to kill the target. What's the difference? The wind blew. Can the blowing of the wind change your moral evaluation of the person? Doesn't seem reasonable for that to be. That's just an accident, something over which you had no control. So then we have a conflict of intuitions. Now, here, that's what's going on here. In two cases, the person's identically irresponsible. I know I should look it up, but listen, I'm too busy or it's too difficult. I'll take a chance. In one case, he takes a chance and he ends up doing something that's objectively wrong, breaks the law. In the other case, he takes a chance and turns out that what he did was permissible. So on the one hand, if you look at his irresponsibility, it looks identical. On the other hand, the one person broke the law, the other person didn't break the law. So that's a difficult contemporary moral problem. I don't know of any accepted solution to the problem. We have a clash of intuitions that's very, very difficult to work out. Now, in the context of the Torah, we settle it, but we settle it by doing an end run, by avoiding the problem in the following way. The consequences are determined by God. So, if he ends up performing the crime, then that's what he needs to live through. He needs to live through that because God engineered that the crime should be the crime that got committed under that condition. And the other case not. So we'll know what to do and we'll have a justification for doing it, but not because we solved the problem of the conflicting intuitions. We brought in extra information from the outside that determines what needs to be done. It's similar to what the Maharal says. Suppose witnesses lie and the guy's convicted and punished. So, on the one hand, we say they're lying. If they're convicted of lying, they're going to be punished for lying. On the other hand, we say it's not a miscarriage of justice because if in a court of Jewish law he ends up being punished, he needed to be punished. Elokim nitzav ad haskel. God's presence is there in the court, and the outcome is always the right outcome for the defendant, even if the law and justice were not applied correctly. Because it isn't an accident that he was there, it is an accident that the punishment was carried out. So, in your case, since the person's doubt and his irresponsibility led actually to an infraction, then he's going to be responsible for the infraction. We're going to take him much more seriously than the... and it's sort of like, okay, I was lazy. Okay, I didn't look it up. How serious is that? How badly should I feel about it? How much resources should I expend in the future to making sure that that never happens again? That might be determined by whether, in fact, my irresponsibility led to an infraction or didn't.
But we don't have an answer as to whether or not the actual doing of the action, besides the intention that someone has, attributes more to the wrongness of that action.
I think that's right, but remember, this is similar to the question you asked the other day. Remember that God is judging the agent, not the action. All of the features of the agent are part of the subject of God's judgment. It's not just the motion of his body, and not just that what he did violated this rule. So that being the case, all this is going to be taken into account. All of these extra features are going to be taken into account. You're asking, how much does this part of the action contribute to the wrongness of the action? That's by extracting from all the other features, which are also going to be taken into account. So an answer to that, to what you're asking, is going to be very misleading. So okay, so this contributes to that, 62%. No, when you have this in the context, sometimes it'll be 60%, sometimes it'll be 2%, sometimes it'll be 90%. It'll vary depending upon the various features of the case.
Also, how should we view it if we would, again, like, let's say, flip it again, where he's doing something good? Like in a classic case of a burglar, they're going to rob a building, and they smash the window. The alarm goes off, they run away. It turns out they release the carbon monoxide from the building, and they save the person in it.
So he'll pay for the window, that's all. he won't get any credit.
Oh, he's not getting credit for that?
No, he'll get no credit for doing that. Especially that you don't get credit for things that happen that you weren't aware of and weren't motivated to do, with one exception. There's one exception. I told you once that if you get a simple answer, it's not right. There are always exceptions. The exception here is, interestingly enough, is suppose you have money in your pocket, there's a hole in your pocket, some money falls out, you don't even know about it, and some poor person, legally poor person, finds it. Then you get a blessing for that having happened with your money. That's what Rashi says. And if you're very careful, he doesn't say you fulfilled the mitzvah of charity. That he didn't say. Because we usually say that to fulfill the mitzvah, you have to intend to fulfill the mitzvah. So he doesn't say that you did the mitzvah, but you'll get a blessing for the fact that your money was used to support a poor person.
Even for neutral actions that have good outcomes, but you weren't intending for the good outcome to occur, you're still not receiving the benefit of that good outcome?
You're not going to get any merit for it. Let's put it that way. I didn't say that. I said that charity is an example where you get a benefit, but not merit.
Yeah.
You don't get any virtue. You're not more virtuous because of the outcome.
But besides the examples of charity, when you do neutral actions that result in a positive good that you didn't intend for.
Well, I know charity is such a thing. I don't know of any other examples. I'm not sure that this is the only possible example. And this isn't even neutral action. This isn't an action at all. It falls out of my pocket, right? And even so, the person gets blessing from it. What the mechanism of that is, I don't really know. Why should you get a blessing from something like that? Yeah, and it's based on an explicit verse. Jeremiah, who was being persecuted by the people, says to God, I want them to be punished for what they're doing, and I'm asking you, if any one of them loses money, please make sure no poor person finds it. Because I know your rules. One of your rules is if a poor person finds it, he'll get a blessing for it. I don't want him to have a blessing. That's how we know it. Because Jeremiah said, please don't do it. Okay.